In the quiet town of Nsuka, where mango trees shaded wide porches and neighbors still greeted each other by name, a man named Chuka lived with his 2 daughters. His wife, Amaka, had died suddenly one rainy evening as she returned from the market, struck by a speeding car. Her death tore a hole through the family like a thunderclap. Chuka, once full of laughter and jokes, now moved like a shadow through his own home. His daughters, Nkem and Adiz, tried to hold things together. Nkem, the older one, was married and lived in Enugu, expecting her first child. Adiz stayed at home, helping their father with chores and managing the house as best she could. But still, something was missing. The food tasted different. The air in the house felt heavier. After many discussions and tears, the daughters encouraged their father to remarry. They believed he needed companionship, someone to ease his loneliness, someone to help with the burdens of life. Nkem especially worried about him being alone. She said, "Papa, Mama wouldn't want you to suffer in silence. You deserve someone who will care for you." After months of persuasion, Chuka agreed. That was when she came into their lives. Her name was Madam Ifeoma, a woman known in her village for her fine looks and quiet nature. She carried herself like royalty and always spoke softly, smiling just enough to seem kind but never too much to reveal her true thoughts. The wedding was small, a rushed affair at the local registry. Nkem, heavy with pregnancy, sent her blessings from Enugu. Adiz smiled politely through it all, trying to feel happy for her father, even though something in her chest refused to settle. From the very first day Madam Ifeoma entered their home, things began to shift. Adiz noticed that meals were no longer shared the same way. Her stepmother rarely touched the food she prepared, instead cooking separate meals and locking away items in cupboards that were once open to everyone. Chuka, blinded by gratitude and peace after so many lonely nights, did not see the little changes. Or perhaps he chose not to. Adiz confided in her sister, but Nkem insisted they give the woman time. "She's still adjusting," Nkem would say over the phone, voice drowsy with pregnancy. "Maybe Mama's shoes are just too big for anyone." Months passed. Nkem gave birth to a baby boy, whom she named Obinna. The family rejoiced. Even Chuka, who had grown quiet and slower since Amaka's death, lit up with joy at the news of his grandson. He wanted to visit, but Madam Ifeoma insisted she should go instead. "You need rest," she said to him. "Let me go on your behalf. The girl just gave birth, she'll need a woman's age." Chuka agreed, and arrangements were made. Adiz wanted to travel too, but her stepmother said no, sternly. "You have school," she reminded her coldly. "This is not the time to play nurse." So Madam Ifeoma set out for Enugu alone. She arrived with her usual grace, bags filled with fruits and wrappers, wearing a geli that shimmered gold under the morning sun. Nkem welcomed her into the small bungalow with gratitude and some hesitation. Something about the woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. Madam Ifeoma cleaned, cooked, and fussed over the baby. She offered to hold Obinna constantly, though Nkem noticed she never quite looked at the child with warmth. It was more like she studied him, as if calculating something far beyond the room they stood in. Then, one afternoon, it happened. Nkem was in the parlor, holding Obinna close as he stirred from sleep. Madam Ifeoma entered, wiping her hands on her wrapper. She reached out and said, "Let me carry him. You need rest." Nkem hesitated. Something in her bones itched. But she ignored it. She shifted the baby carefully, slowly extending her arms to place him in her stepmother's embrace. But the moment Madam Ifeoma's hands touched the child, she let go. It happened so fast, yet Nkem would remember it in fragments forever. The slight twist of Madam Ifeoma's wrist. The blankness in her face. The soft thud as Obinna's small body hit the hard tiled floor. Silence. A silence so heavy it pressed down on the walls, squeezing the breath out of the room. Nkem screamed. She dropped to the floor, scooping her baby into her arms, blood pooling from his tiny head. Her cries split the air like broken glass. Neighbors came running. Some tried to call an ambulance. Others held her as she wailed, rocking the lifeless child in her arms. Madam Ifeoma stood to the side, arms folded. Her expression was unreadable. When someone asked her what happened, she simply said, "He slipped." But Nkem knew. She knew in the way Obina fell. In the way Madame Ifeoma didn't move to catch him. In the stillness that followed. She knew in her soul that her stepmother had let go on purpose. And yet, there were no cameras. No witnesses. No one who saw it clearly. Just a grieving mother and a dead child. What would justice look like when the truth wore a mask of politeness? The funeral was quiet, but thick with whispers. Neighbors, relatives, and church members filled Nkem's compound in Enugu, dressed in dark wrappers and head ties, faces long and voices low. The pastor spoke of God's will, of the brevity of life, of comfort in sorrow. But Nkem heard nothing. She sat still on a white plastic chair, her hands trembling on her lap, eyes swollen and blank. Her husband, Ifani, held her hand the entire time, though his grip did little to anchor her. Madame Ifeoma sat at the edge of the gathering, her expression unreadable beneath her oversized sunglasses. She barely moved throughout the ceremony, barely spoke to anyone. Some said she looked heartbroken. Others said she looked bored. Nkem said nothing at all. When the mourners began to leave, whispers followed them. That woman. Did you see how the baby fell? But why would she? She's the stepmother, right? And yet, there was no proof. The weeks that followed were heavy. Nkem moved through her days like a ghost. Her husband did his best, but some wounds refused to heal. Every corner of the house reminded her of Obina. His tiny clothes. His untouched crib. The soft rattle beside the window. She wanted answers, but none came. One morning, Adiz showed up unannounced. She entered the house with eyes wide and red, throwing herself into her sister's arms without a word. The two wept for minutes, their pain tangled like roots under the soil. She did it, Adiz whispered through her sobs. I know it. I feel it. Nkem said nothing at first. But her silence was heavy with agreement. Later that evening, while Ifani was out and the compound was quiet, the sisters sat on the floor of Nkem's bedroom, the fan humming weakly above them. I started watching her after you buried Obina, Adiz said quietly. Something about her has changed. Or maybe it was always there. She talks to herself. She keeps locks on everything, drawers, even the fridge. And Papa, he just looks tired all the time. Nkem looked up. You think she's doing something to him too? Adiz nodded. I don't know what, but Papa isn't himself. He forgets things. Sleeps too much. And she never lets me see him alone anymore. The words settled in the room like dust. What do we do? Nkem asked, her voice thin. Adiz's eyes narrowed. We find out who she really is. The sisters began to make plans. They called an old friend of their mother's, a retired nurse who once lived in the same village as Madame Ifeoma. Her name was MMA Grace, and she was the kind of woman who kept everything. Notes, memories, secrets. When Nkem called her and explained everything, there was a long silence on the other end. Then the old woman said quietly, that woman. I remember her. But her name wasn't always Ifeoma. The line went dead. The next day, Adiz traveled back to Nsukka. She pretended nothing had changed. She greeted her stepmother with politeness, cleaned the compound, helped in the kitchen. But her eyes were wide open now. And one evening, when Madame Ifeoma left the house to visit a neighbor, Adiz crept into the woman's room. She found a small, rusted key beneath a flower pot by the window. She opened the locked drawer in the wardrobe. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman, young, angry-eyed, wearing the uniform of a psychiatric hospital. Beneath it were several yellowed documents. One of them read, Patient discharged, MBA Florence, alias Ifeoma. Diagnosis, borderline personality disorder with violent episodes. Supervised medication required. Adiz's blood turned to ice. She snapped a photo of the document with her phone, locked the drawer, and returned the key before Madame Ifeoma returned. That night, she barely slept. By morning, she had booked a bus to Enugu. When she arrived at her sister's house, she handed Nkem the phone. They stared at the screen together. I knew it, Nkem whispered. She's not just wicked. She's dangerous. And now, they both knew the truth. But knowing was not enough. They needed a plan. They needed to get their father away from her before it was too late. The next few days were tense. Nkem and Adi spoke in hushed tones, always double-checking that no one was listening. Even calls to their father became delicate, carefully timed, and wrapped in normal conversation. Chuka sounded weaker each time they spoke, his once booming voice reduced to a sluggish mumble. "He's not just tired," Adi said one evening. "I think she's drugging him." Nkem sat in silence, staring at her phone. If we confront her directly, she could hurt him or disappear with him. We need proof. Something more. And then a plan began to take shape. That weekend, Adiz returned home again, this time with a tiny voice recorder stitched into the lining of her handbag. It was Afani's idea. He knew someone who worked in a local media house. Sometimes, he said, the best way to trap a snake is to let it think you've already been bitten. Adiz pretended to come home for the Easter holiday. She smiled more. She laughed loudly, even cooked Madame Ifeoma's favorite soup, bitter leaf with smoked fish. Slowly, she let her guard down just enough to bait the woman into comfort. Then one night, just after dinner, Adiz knocked lightly on her stepmother's bedroom door. "I want to talk," she said. The woman looked up from her chair, surprised. "About what?" "About what happened in Enugu. About Obinna." Madame Ifeoma blinked. Her eyes darted. Adiz stepped in and closed it gently behind her. "I know it wasn't an accident," she whispered. "But I want to understand why." For a moment, the room was dead silent. The only sound was the slow creak of the ceiling fan. Then, to Adiz's horror, Madame Ifeoma smiled. It was not a soft, polite smile. It was sharp. Cold. A smile that belonged to something that didn't fear being caught. "You're your mother's child," she said slowly. "Too curious for your own good." Adiz's hands trembled at her sides. "Do you want the truth?" Madame Ifeoma said, leaning forward. "Fine. That child, he was a mistake. He shouldn't have existed. None of you should have. Your mother thought she was better than me. She took Chuka from me once. Now I have him. And all of you will learn your place." Adiz's blood ran cold. Madame Ifeoma stood, face inches from hers. "I didn't drop him," she said calmly. "I let him go." That was all Adiz needed. She left the room quickly, muttering something about being tired, her voice shaking. The recorder in her bag was still blinking red. By the next morning, she was on a bus to Enugu. Nkem and Afani listened to the recording in their bedroom, hearts pounding as the woman's words spilled out. It was all there, her confession, her motive, her threat. They had her. But getting justice wouldn't be easy. They needed someone with power. Someone who would believe them and act quickly. Nkem remembered someone, Chief Eziobi, a close friend of their late mother's, now a retired magistrate with influence in Nsukka. The man had always adored Amaka and often visited during the festive season with wine and stories. He listened to the recording in silence. Then he nodded. "She's mentally unstable. And she's committed a crime. If we handle this properly, we can have her removed from that house, legally." Within days, an official complaint was filed. The recording was handed over. The papers about her past mental health, verified by MMA Grace, were submitted. But before any move could be made, a strange call came through to Nkem's phone. It was a neighbor from Nsukka. "I know no wedding day happen the woman whispered. "But dem carry your papa go hospital this morning. He just collapse." Madame Ifeoma de shout say na poison. Nkem's heart stopped. "She's going to kill him before they take her away," she whispered. That night, under the darkness of early morning, Nkem and Adiz boarded a night bus to Nsukka. But none of them knew that by the time they arrived, the house would be empty. No trace of Madame Ifeoma. No sign of their father. Just a broken teacup in the kitchen. And a single line scratched into the wall with something sharp. "You should have left me alone." The house smelled of silence and something burnt, like sorrow left too long in the sun. Nkem's heart thundered as she moved from room to room, calling out, "Papa." Her voice echoed off the walls, but no answer came. In his bedroom, the sheets were torn off the mattress, the wardrobe hung open, and all of his clothes were gone. Adiz stood near the doorway, her fists clenched. She took him. The police arrived an hour later, called by Chief Eziobi himself. Officers combed the house while a small crowd gathered outside, buzzing with theories and fear. A neighbor claimed to have seen Madame Ifioma drive off early that morning with Chuka in the back seat, looking dazed and barely able to lift his head. She left no note. No clue. Only that carved message on the wall, cold, deliberate, and full of warning. For the next 3 days, Nkem and Adiz searched. They filed missing person reports in every LGA from Nsukka to Abakaliki. They visited hospitals, police checkpoints, even uncompleted buildings where runaways sometimes hid. Nothing. It was as though Madame Ifioma had vanished into smoke, dragging their father into the dark with her. But evil leaves a trail, no matter how carefully it walks. It was a local chemist in a village outside Abalawafor who made the call. A strange woman had come in, asking for sedatives. She was with an older man who looked too weak to speak. When shown a photo, the chemist confirmed it, not the same woman. The police acted swiftly. They raided a small, rented room behind a mechanic workshop in the outskirts of town. Inside, they found Chuka. He was lying on a mattress, barely conscious, his wrists bound loosely with cloth. His eyes fluttered open when he heard Nkem's voice. He whispered her name. And then, for the first time in what felt like years, he began to cry. They arrested Madame Ifioma on the spot. She did not struggle. In fact, she smiled as they cuffed her hands. "You think this ends here?" she whispered to Adiz as she was led away. "You think I'm the only darkness out there?" But Adiz didn't reply. Because the war was over. And she had won. Weeks passed. Chuka stayed in the hospital for days, slowly recovering as the drugs left his system. He barely spoke at first, but with time, he began to eat, to smile, and then to speak of things he remembered in fragments: bitter tea, a soft voice telling him not to trust his daughters, a dream of a crying baby. They never told him the full truth about Obina. Some things, Nkem believed, were too cruel to burden the heart of a man already cracked by grief. Madame Ifioma was sent back to the psychiatric hospital she had once been discharged from. This time, under full security. Nkem went on to become a women's advocate in her church, speaking softly to mothers and daughters about the shadows that wear pretty faces. Adiz returned to school, older now, sharper, no longer willing to ignore the tremble in her bones when something felt wrong. And Chuka? He planted a small garden at the front of the house. In the center of it, he placed a small stone with a name etched into it, Obina. Each morning, he would sit beside it and whisper to the wind. Love, after all, never forgets. Even when it's broken. Even when it's late. We'll be stopping here now. Kindly like and subscribe. You can drop a comment about what you think in this story. Your opinion will be appreciated. Thank you.